So welcome everyone to another episode of Next Gen Leaders podcast. Today I'm really excited to introduce a guest who I've actually has inspired me from afar for decades. I'll be honest, Paul. We can put our age bracket out there, but I've watched this individual on the football field, which I'll introduce, Paul. But I've also now seen what he's doing in his post-football career and how he's really helping leaders. So I was really excited to get you on the show, Paul. So first of all, thank you very much for joining us, mate.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited about having a good conversation about leadership. So looking forward to it.
Awesome. And so just a very brief introduction, because I want Paul to also do a introduction as well. Paul Roos is an AFL legend. And for our global and American fans specifically, I'll sort of explain. Actually, I might get Paul, you to explain a bit about the AFL game. But Paul played 356 games as a player for Fitzroy and Sydney. Also coached 268 games as a coach for Sydney Swans and Melbourne Demons. And if I'm right, Roosie, you actually won a premiership with Sydney.
Yeah, premiership at Sydney in 2005. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
fantastic. And so Paul's taken all of that experience and that knowledge. And if you do get the opportunity, go to YouTube, check out Paul. Leadership was a quality you had way back, Paul. You can just tell it from your demeanor, how people respected you and what you achieved in your career. But you've taken all of that and you're now the founder and director of Performance by Design. And at Performance by Design, you build high performing cultures by helping role model leaders bring team behaviors to life, which I was really the biggest reason why I was actually passionate to get. How do we bring that to life? So, mate, I'd just love you to give the audience an introduction to yourself and also the point that you're actually living in Hawaii now.
Yeah. So for our Americans fans, I went to the Rams Bills game the other night, which
Oh,
was amazing. No,
yeah.
which was incredible. So yeah, I've got a good long history in AFL. My wife in the American Football League as well. My wife's American, so we're in Hawaii now. We've relocated to Hawaii. So for the American fans, this AFL is sort of the equivalent to the American Football League. It's only played in Australia, similar to the NFL in America. It's enormously popular. We call it a grand final, which is like the Super Bowl sort of thing. So there's a lot of the game itself is very, very different for anyone that's seen it, but probably the summary of the game is quite similar. It's an incredibly popular game in Australia, as the NFL is. Huge crowds. The grand final will be in a couple of weeks. 100,000 people go to the MCG grand final. So just to put that in a bit of context, but I started playing sort of semi-professional back in 1980, 81, and I guess coming to where I am now, I just saw a huge, huge evolution of the change in leadership and culture. Very much when I started, it was just top-down leadership, yell, scream. And this was nothing against the leaders, Wolsey and Parko and those guys. They didn't have time to build cultures and, vulnerable leadership and authenticity. It was about train really hard. But as we moved into the sort of 90s, as I moved to Sydney, it started to become a full-time vocation, so suddenly we weren't getting to training at 5 in the afternoon or 6 in the morning. We were arriving at 7:30 and spending the whole day there. So all of a sudden, when I became coach, leadership has got to evolve, and it started to evolve. It's got to change. And that's probably why I'm, where I am today with Performance by Design, because through the enormous change that happened in my career as a player, 17 seasons, and then taking on coach, it's a dramatic change in AFL football. And obviously we'll delve into some of those changes. I played 356 games, played for Fitzroy, which was a team out of the Victorian Football League. And then when it became the Australian Football League, I transferred to the Sydney Swans and played 4 seasons. Then I coached the Sydney Swans for 8.5 years. And then I was asked to come back out of retirement and took Melbourne, who were really, won 2 games and lost 20. Mm-hmm. And we turned that franchise around in 3 years to about 50-50. And then we had a succession plan with Simon Goodwin, and thankfully they won the premiership last year. So that's a really quick snapshot, mate, for the listeners to have an understanding of why we're chatting today.
Well, is this may put me a little bit backwards. I'm like a little schoolboy right now. I'm very blessed to actually say my 11-year-old who just turned 12 just started AFL.
Oh, cool.
And
awesome.
She loves it.
Yeah.
She absolutely loves it. And we ended up recruiting 4 of the girls from the touch footy team who all now play AFL.
Yeah.
So there's 6 girls in that school now all playing AFL. It's just brilliant. And for Australian mums and dads, I thoroughly recommend it. It's a great community, and a really good sport for the kids as well. It's awesome. So, Mate, let's touch on leadership. So
Yeah.
you touched on it just slightly. You've gone through a massive generational change of leadership. So let's
Yeah.
talk about that at the minute and just bring that into current times. But love to get your perspective of where you've come from, how you've seen it evolve, and what do you think is important today?
Yeah, so I started in 1980, 81, as I said, and very much, I don't care where you were probably working at the time, whether it was a insurance company, car salesman, Fitzroy Footy Club. Yeah, leadership then was very much top down. Do this, do this, do this, do this, and when I went to Fitzroy, I gladly just fitting into that model. I was a young kid, 16 years of age, and whatever Wolsey said, I do. Whatever my senior teammate said, I do. But I was really lucky. What I realized pretty quickly is as influential as Robert Walls, my coach, was, because we were part-time, we had 80 players training. It was really my peers that drove the success or failure of the football club. And I was extremely fortunate that the role model leaders at that footy club, Gary Wilson, Bernie Quinlan, Mickey Conlon, Laurie Serafini, were just really good people.
Yep.
They trained really hard, but they had really good values as individuals, and that probably, you talked about, performance by design, and we talk about role model leaders bringing behaviors to life. If you want someone to do something, you got to do it first. And I learned that really early in the early 80s. As we went through, I became captain around 1987, I think it was, and then you started to want to role model that behavior and lead, etc., etc. But then, as I said, when I went to Sydney, we were full time there.
Yeah.
And leadership was starting to change. And one of the best things I do, and I really recommend it for your listeners, I sat down at the end of 1998 as a player. I retired in 1998. And I wrote down the things I liked about my leaders and the things I didn't like about my leaders. And the way we talk about it to our leaders now at Performance by Design is, are you the leader you wish you had? All right. I'll say that again. Are you the leader now that you wish you had when you were growing up through your corporate world or footy world or whatever it might be? And I wrote that through the eyes of a player. All right. What did I want from the coaches? Not when I got to being a coach, what did I want to give the players? No, as a player, what did I want from the coaches? And really, it was the best document I had. So now, if we look at that evolution, the best leaders now build strong relationships, are really authentic. What does authentic mean? It means they just tell it the way it is. No, I don't know the answer to that, Roosie. Let me go and find out. Gee, I had a bad weekend. My kids were sick. Sorry, I turned up late to the meeting this morning. I really, really apologize, but it's been a really tough weekend. That's the notion of leadership now. And as we touched on before we came on air, there's still this little discourse, the lead. I'm 59, the leaders that in that era are still struggling a little bit to adapt to this new form of leadership, because habits are really, really hard to break, and if I've been doing this for so long, do, tell, yell, scream, it's really hard for me to go, no, I don't know the answer to that. Or, mate, how are you? Are you okay? I just noticed this morning you're a little bit late. You're not normally late for a meeting. Come into my office. Let's go and have a coffee. What's going on? It's really difficult because they've been formed in this early period of late 70s, early 80s, 90s, where it was all top down.
Yes.
And that's changing quite significantly, isn't it?
Yeah, and massively, because even if you look at, I mean, I'm a bit of a sports nut, but if you read the Mike Tyson book, a lot of his early behavior was, well, that's what they did before me.
Yeah, 100%.
Right, so that's what I did, and now we're waking up. And you also talked about that other concept as well, which I find the American culture is. I remember starting my career in the US around 2003, and they take their career very, very seriously, like a professional sports outfit did back then, where we're really a little bit behind in that migration to professionalism and also seeing our job as a professional, right? As opposed to it's a job as well. So let's talk about, well, let's touch on this. So if you're a leader who is got a lot of experience, in their 40s, 50s, and you're questioning how the younger generation was raised on technology, how their instant gratification is required, what's your coaching to those leaders in relation to how do we take a step back and do what you potentially did, is say, well, what does the next generation of my leadership framework look like?
There's a number of things I'll touch on there. Firstly, one of the first thing we do at Performance by Design, and what I realized when we did this with the Sydney Swans, is really define your culture. I think too many companies actually don't know what their culture is. And by that, I mean, a lot of companies have a mission or a purpose or whatever. Most sort of have values, but what is underpinning the value? What's the action of honesty? What's the action of innovative? So we work a lot in the behavioral space, because if we're really clear, we call it a culture code. If we're really, really clear on the culture code, I talk about a lot. We can act our way in or we act our way out. But if we're not sure, we've got this whole work ethic of murky behaviors and the way we lead or the way we follow or who's doing what. So I would say that's the first thing. Get your culture code embedded and use it to hire and fire and reward and challenge. One of the best things that I find is we do a lot of profiling, and it's really, really important. A lot of companies do it. Here's Roosie, here's your profile, whatever it is, they use. Here's your strengths, here's your weaknesses, here's your computer, here's your desk. The way we do it is understanding yourself, but more importantly, understanding others. All right. So we do it in the context of us as a team. You'll have a different profile to I. And once we explain that, it's less about the generations, but more around what makes them tick. What's their personalities? But then once we've got our culture code, we all abide by the culture code, but it's just how we communicate. You and I will communicate differently. If you were my boss, you'd be going, Roosie, look, let's go and have a coffee. Let's sit down. Let me work you through why that didn't work yesterday. Other people that are more, we call them eagles, just you tell them what to do and they'll go and do it. So that's a really integral part in the system of understanding what makes people tick. And the other thing, build really strong relationships. Okay. Now that's not just going out on a Friday night or, going to lunch and having a drink and all that sort of stuff. That's meaningful relationships. And that's the third stage of our process. How do we get to know people better? All right. So I know what's going on at home. I know what their journey's been, because if we build strong relationships, then I can have honest conversations with you. All right. We talk about care in our company. If you really care about someone, we can have some honest conversations, but have a lot of positive. I think the other thing in businesses too often, we wait for the bad things to happen because we think that's as leaders. Be positive. Well done, mate. Great, fantastic. Love the way you jumped in yesterday on that meeting. I was lost a little bit. You picked up the slack for me. That was awesome. Oh, listen, hey, thanks for sending those flowers out to Tammy. That was awesome. She really appreciated it on her birthday. Positive feedback is so important. Then, if we've got to have an honest discussion, it's a lot easier. Roosie, come in here, mate. Look, the way you fronted yesterday, you're really in a bad mood. You upset a lot of people. We can't have that, mate. We talk about our business talks about supporting each other. You didn't support anyone. Yeah, mate, you're 100% right. Right. So there's a real process around it. And I think that's probably what we do better than a lot of companies. We put these concepts into real life scenarios where people go, oh, okay, now I understand what that looks like. Now I understand what that generation, they want purpose. They want to come to work and feel like they're being, listened to, heard. Now, sometimes I get a little bit frustrating because they've only been there for 2 weeks. They want a promotion. So,
you've got kids and I've got kids as well. So you touched on, my goodness, you touched on a lot of things then as I was walking through the process, but let's just go back to the start for a second. You sort of said culture, yes, their values, yes, their purpose, their statements, but the statement needs to be, you use the word actionable, right? It needs to be led by human behavior. I remember the best one that I ever had, and there were a bunch of values, but I couldn't really remember. My ADHD brain wouldn't allow me to remember all the words on that value list, but what it did allow me to actually understand is transparency, accountability, and trust. And it was the simple meaning of transparency being understand what's expected of you, but also understand what's expected of others. Not the fact that you've got a million lines of information, because that transparency is not going to help. And then the accountability is ensuring that everything's measurable. And then trust, the trust element. But those two first, the thing I sort of get from this conversation, I can be different to you. And I could even interpret them a little bit differently. But as long as we have the same guidelines, we can always come together and move something forward, which is incredibly powerful.
Conversation. Yeah, just have the conversation. You're right. Our culture code should be just the foundation for our conversations.
Yep.
Because then it won't be exactly the same. But if we're always having the conversation and bouncing things, oh, mate, was that the right thing to do? Oh, no, good question, Roosie. Let's get our team together. Like a hybrid workplace is a really good example of that at the moment. We have so many people asking us what we should do. Have the conversation. High performing team. Is it the best thing for the team for Mary to be home on a Friday and Roosie to be home on a Monday? I don't know. I haven't got, but have the conversation.
Correct. Yeah.
Is it the best thing for the team? And that's what your culture code is there to do.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So in relation to the leadership side, let's just really focus on that. If I have a blocker as a leader, all right, and my blocker is I don't have the capacity to always listen to Roosie's feedback.
Yeah.
How are you looking at me as a leader, and what are some of the things that I would need to consider to remove those? Well, understand the blockers, acknowledge them, but then how to remove those blockers so I can lead a very high performing team forward.
I think self-awareness is one of the most underrated things. And I think that it's more conceptually. I think that the thing that I realized pretty early is no one expected me to know all the answers when I was coaching Sydney Swans. You know, no one. So that's actually quite a relief when you come to terms with it. I think, and that's the graduation as we talk generationally. I'm sure, generationally in the early 80s, no one said to Wolsey, you don't need to know everything. He thought, well, I have to know everything. Yeah, the CEO of QBE thought, I have to know everything. One of the great things about the evolution of culture and leadership is the best leaders say, well, I don't know that. So my first thing when we talk about leaders, because we do a lot of one-on-one individual coaching as well, don't worry. If you don't know something, ask someone.
Yes.
And it's so powerful for the leader to go, actually, I don't know, because it disarms everyone and it connects people together. So self-awareness is really important. The second thing to that is make sure you're creating an environment where people can give you feedback as well. Now, that's really difficult. Yeah, because if you're a real hard-ass leader that has always been told, or never been told anything and basically thinks you do everything right, massive mistake, So make sure, if you've got a really good friend, a really confident, keep poking your head in his office or her office. And was that the right thing to do? Or let them come into your office. And if you can't do that, and I'm going to say this, I'm going to make this really clear.
Yep.
You can't do those things, you're not a great leader. I don't care about your title. So let's be really clear. There's a title and there's leadership.
Yep.
Just because you've got a title doesn't mean you're a great leader. All right. So, we could talk to her blue in the face and we probably have the same views. But if you don't have those 4 or 5 things as a leader, you're still the CEO. No one's going to dispute that because you're getting a paycheck and your title says CEO. But if you think you're the leader, you're not. You are driving everyone mad. And let me tell you what's going to happen. All the best people are going to leave first.
Yep.
All right. And that's unequivocal. The stats tell you that. The best people leave poor cultures first because their self-worth is too high to stay. So if you're a leader out there going, well, that's not true, I'm a great leader. No, you're not. Everyone might be telling you are, okay? But I'm telling you, you are not a great leader and cannot be a great leader if you can't do 4 or 5 of those things.
So, well, in what you do, are there metrics for what is a great leader? Do you put those in play with to help
the metric
measure?
the metric is really our culture code. That's really important because and the strength of the culture code, and maybe particularly for the American listeners. So I'll give you a really practical example. So when we started Sydney, this was the first time it's ever been done. So we go down to Coffs Harbour, all right, and coaches and players in together. We come up with our culture code. Now, this is not going to happen in business because it's too challenging for business. But this second part, the first part can. The second part, we then pick our leadership group. So football clubs are picking their leaders based on their culture code. All right. So when that happens, we're away. All right. But we've got to make sure those leaders are held accountable. The leaders have to be fundamentally doing the culture code first and foremost. All right. So that's the way a footy club works. And there's no reason why a business doesn't work like that, other than the fact that you're not going to get everyone picking the CEO.
Yep.
But the reality is the CEO is still incumbent on measuring themselves on those behaviors. We systemize. We have what we call a performance center, which is a systemized process where you implant all the data, and then we actually monitor it 100%. But it's going to be monitored.
Yep.
Are you doing what you say you're going to do? Here's our culture code. Here's the feedback you've been getting, and you get regular feedback.
Yeah. And you talked about the good relationships. And I did see an article recently that still talked about it's the most charismatic leaders that can build relationships that still tend to get the promotions. They still tend to get faster than anywhere else. What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Again, I mean, what I find a lot, and what we find a lot, is most promotions are happening because people are technically really good at what they do. Now, that might be part of the tech, but the marketing manager is probably the best marketing person. The IT problem is often we haven't learned those leadership skills, and we see that a lot.
Yep.
So what are those leadership skills? And that's what we've got to teach and learn along the way. And a lot of them come up. It's interesting because a lot of them come up not necessarily at work. A lot of them come up through podcasts, books, interaction at the local netball club, football club, school board, or whatever. So people ask me a lot all the time, how did you learn about leadership? I think one of my strengths is my ability to connect with people and understand, that was really interesting. All right. So take every single opportunity to expand your leadership capabilities. All right. And understand what leadership is. Because often you're not going to get that education while you're at work, because you're fundamentally doing. Leadership is often about not doing. We talk about the player coach syndrome. Leadership is often not doing. But what do most leaders do? They go and do because they can. And that becomes really frustrating for everyone, doesn't it?
Well, that's a whole different topic. We could go on about that one. So
100%.
You touched on hybrid, because this is really interesting, because part of what when we created stratapp was to run remote and hybrid teams, right? And I remember saying to the best leader of my time, saying, he was in Sydney from Seattle, and he was doing such an amazing. He energized people, just gravitated towards him. Right. And he was phenomenal co-founder. But then I said to him, how do you motivate people when you're not in the same room? We've got to create a framework that allows this to live every single day for the person who joined this morning and the person who's been on board 15 years. So what's your take on leadership, and how do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, we've always had some form of hybrid. I mean, I was a sales rep, a sales rep for Active Leisure, Diodora, Lotus. We've always had some form of hybrid workplace. I think as long as the mechanics are in place, and you touched on some of the mechanics, what I'm seeing, which is probably a bit more frustrating to the people themselves, is the mechanics have dropped off. They've just basically let everyone go and work for themselves without putting any systems in place that you were talking about before, because we've always had remote salespeople, perhaps remote IT people, particularly in the last 10, 15 years when, IT and apps and all that sort of stuff have come on board. So, but I think the biggest mistake people are making now is not having the conversation. What's best for you is not going to be best for me, or it's not going to be best for someone else. And the other thing I use the analogy a lot, which stops people in their tracks a little bit, is if you were following the Sydney Swans, the Brisbane Broncos, the Seattle Seahawks, and you found out that a quarter of your team were training in Wollongong, half your team were training at the SCG, and the other half were training at Newcastle, you'd rip up your card. So my point being, it depends on the company. If you have to be there on a Friday afternoon for a sales meeting, you have to. We can't. What I'm seeing too much is, hang on, I got to drop the kids off to school. Traffic on a Friday afternoon's no good. That's not about team. That's about I. And I think I reckon we're about 6 months away from seeing what the new norm is. And I think the new norm will settle, but it won't be what it is today. And the companies that'll do really well are the ones that are back in the workplace fundamentally. Around what a high-performing team is, with systems and processes in place.
It's really interesting, because we look at what's the power of company management? Because the company has the vision, the values, and the goals, whether they're public or private. What's the power of the team management? And
Yeah.
then what's the power of the self-management?
Yeah.
And we're looking more at the self-management piece for exactly the reason you talked about. People are getting now to decide, hey, there are more important things than what that profession can afford me. I need to spend more time here. I need to, and whatever it may be, whether it's health, whether it's family, whatever, I'm dropping the kids off, whatever it may be. Now we get the ability to find a common space for the company and the self to come together and say, now let's work through it together. So I'm going to ask you this question around, it sort of feeds off a little bit about relationships. How important is it for companies, teams, to also factor in the personal journey of their employees and find a common ground now? Because as you said, we've come from a very top-down framework, but now we're sort of crossing boundaries.
I think that you're right. The biggest mistake companies have made pre-COVID have said we care about our people, but don't give a shit about them.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, the pandemic's hit. People now have got a choice to work, and suddenly people are scrambling. Oh, we do care about you.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have had to have COVID, and we shouldn't have had to move to hybrid workplaces to care for our staff.
Yeah.
I don't care
Great
what you're
point.
selling.
Yeah.
I don't care what you're selling. We're all made up of staff. And that's probably the thing that really drives me crazy. Why are we only having the conversation now when it's flipped around and the power's moved more to the employee?
Yeah.
If we had a conversation, people talk to me about work-life balance. It's garbage. It's life balance, to your point.
Yeah.
You've got to flip the narrative around. And I'm not saying don't drop the kids. I dropped the kids off to school when I was coaching the Swans, but I worked around a time frame.
Yep.
What was best for the Swans, what's best for my family. And I had a really good balance. We've got to stop talking about work-life balance, and we're going to talk about life balance.
Yeah.
And my point being, don't drop the kids off to school when the sales meeting is on, the most critical sales meeting at the time. But don't go into work just because, someone's called a meeting like that out of the blue.
Yep.
Yeah, half an hour before you drop the kids off to school, and you don't even know what the meeting's all about.
Yep.
That's a waste of time. So
Yeah.
I think the point, we've always got to put people at the forefront of our business, because people are our business. It doesn't matter what it is. So I think what I'm saying is that there's great adjustment. Let's have the conversation, and let's do what's best for the company and the person. Because if we do that right, we'll have good conversations, and we'll come to common ground. We'll have a great culture. People will be bouncing into work. Other days they'll be home, dropping the kids off, having lunch. But it can't be a one-way street. And I think it was too far. It was too far the way of the employee before. I think it's gone too far. Sorry, the employer. Now it's gone too far the other way. There needs to be a coming together. Bring them together, and you're going to have some really awesome workplaces for the companies that work really hard on it.
Yeah, this is cool, because this is a 10-year journey of some of my thinking. Because when I was managing teams across 8 countries, and some of those countries were 15 hours away.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
It's impossible to do without the right the direction, the clear why, or the purpose, as we want to put it. But then enabling our teams with a set of frameworks and tools that allows them to make sure they're maximizing their values, maximizing what's important to them, whether it's at work or not. You touched on something else that we're really passionate about, which is, if I am going to rock up to a meeting, I want to know why. I want to know we're clearly going to get an outcome. I want to know those outcomes are actionable. And hey, if Marty keeps on talking, I want to, either stop Marty from talking, or Marty's going to be held accountable to his own actions. Because when I go to the next meeting, he hasn't done it and expecting us to do it.
Yeah,
that's not okay. That's not okay.
People don't dislike meetings. They just dislike shit meetings. And you're 100% right. And I learned a lot when I was coaching. And the best meeting we had was on a Monday morning. And I know other clubs did it really differently. Other clubs made their coaches code the game after the game. All the coaches coded the game. Then they come in Monday, and then the senior coach would show his edits, and someone else would show his edits. My philosophy is, guys, we're all in Monday morning. We're going to watch the game together. And what that allowed, the whole week got set up by that framework. Every coach knew what I wanted. I knew what they were showing their players. We collectively, now that meeting took about 5 hours, but it was the most productive 5 hours because it saved so much time for the rest of the week. And when I share that story a lot with the companies we work with, the response is almost the same.
Yeah.
Roos, you're right. We waste so much time. Tell us again what you did. Well, this is what we did. Gee, that's a really good idea. I don't understand why we don't do that here. But again, we're so busy doing that we don't pull ourselves out and go, right, how do we manage? How do we lead? How do we organize? And that gets back to that accountability, reward, and challenge. If we're never together in the systems, if we're never putting systems in place, then it's really hard to get to where we want to get to.
So let me just touch on that for a second, because you and I are going to have to cut off at some stage, because I get a sense we could talk for 3 hours.
100%.
But that example you just gave was you as head coach, right?
Yep.
You're a head coach, and then you have coaches that look after part of the field, as we do in business. We have a head coach, effectively. We have divisional heads, and then we build out from there. But your philosophy was everyone has full transparency to everything that we're going to talk about for the next week. But you may break up in sections over time, and you're going to go into your and I want to touch on silos for a second. But that was your framework. You said we're all going to view it as a group. We're all going to discuss the challenges, what went well, what didn't, and then we'll break up into the groups to then focus on their core parts. So when we come back together, primarily game day, we're all going to be moving at the same direction.
Yeah, so we would get in Monday. So we'd forwards coach, backs coach, midfield coach, development coach, IT guy. There's probably 7 or 8 people in the room. We're all watching it together. So we break down what happened on the weekend, and you're right. So then I would do the main review. The others would break out on the Monday. Then all the coaches have their individual players, their stoppages, all that sort of stuff, 100%. Then we'd come together on a Wednesday. We'd pick the team. But it set the tone for the week. I trusted that they knew what I wanted. They trusted me. I trusted them. And then, they would go away. Forwards would work with his group. The mids would work with his group. The backs would work with his group. The development would know about the seconds players, etc. It was just so productive, and it stopped the corridor conversations. It stopped, everyone having to drop past my office and clarify a piece of vision or whatever. So that 5 hours, whilst it was a big chunk of time, it saved way more than 5 hours over the course of the week, and built trust and consistency of message. When we're trying to build something collectively, we need to be consistent. What does the exec team want? And then we trust them. And they go and do their job. I don't have to see them for the rest of the week. Obviously I did. But the reality is I trusted them so much that I didn't necessarily have to see them, because I knew that they knew the message. I knew they were technically really good at what they did. And then when you always come together, there was no ambiguity around the messaging.
Yeah. And all built off the culture code. And I sort of, when I listened to your talk, I rally it all back, because everyone's got to be moving towards the same values, common framework values, but you're talking about the detail. The other word you just said, which, to be honest, we haven't talked a lot about on this podcast, is consistency.
Yeah.
What a great word for leadership, right?
Yeah.
Get everyone consistent, so there's not the sideways discussions, there's not the hallway conversations that then starts to fray, which impacts ultimately what you deliver.
Right? Yeah, 100%. And which was, I went to, and the American people on the call would love this. I went to watch USC for the Australians. USC is a huge college. USC have just employed Lincoln Riley, who's a really well-paid coach. USC's got a really good friend of mine who's a college coach got me into watch training. Now, one of the things, mate, that I said to him, I said, how do they get consistency? There were so many coaches coaching at once. There would have been, without word of a lie, there would have been 30 coaches all over the field. And it was a really good analogy, because what I like about sport, even if you don't like sport, go and watch a game. Or it's like a business, within 2 hours, 2.5 hours of a footy game, or, whatever, of a rugby league game, or whatever. It's like a business. And it really hit me in that moment. How does this coach get consistency? Lincoln Riley, he pretty much was standing behind the offensive team most of the time. Defensive coaches, offensive line coaches, defensive line coaches, junior coaches, running in plays, running in messages. And you're absolutely right. It hit me there that so much can go wrong.
Yep.
particularly
Yep.
in big organizations, if we don't have consistency of
Mm.
message, but consistency of message is only going to come from consistency of our culture code, consistency of our technical KPIs,
Yep.
and consistency of meeting cadences and information flow. And I think you're going to touch on before silos. Oh
Yep.
my goodness. Look,
Yep.
we could have another 2 hours on silos because that is a huge problem in most corporations.
Yeah, it is. It was, and they're the things around the that accelerated through COVID, right?
Yeah,
And it wasn't just silos of groups anymore; it's silos of individuals.
yeah,
Right? It's gone
yeah.
to another layer, and I spoke to a lot of CEOs around that period, and they were genuinely concerned for their teams. Like the
Yeah.
individuals, they're sitting at home now, going, "What do I do next?" Or, "Hey, how do I
Mm,
reconnect?" Or, "Who do I talk
yeah.
to?"
Yeah.
But it's now the point you keep on coming back to. It's the action of it.
Yeah.
We can talk about
Exactly.
this, and I love all the frameworks on LinkedIn, and I love all the quotes that we get. But it's how do we take that and put it into action?
How
So
many? Yeah. How do we
so,
implement it?
so
Yeah.
Ruzi, with that, mate, I cannot thank you enough. And you know what? I've got a real sense right now, having been also working globally in the US for 20 years, the Americans are going to love your Australian nature and the way you communicate, because it's so fun but direct at the same time, and very clear.
Yeah.
So, mate, it was a real pleasure to
Yeah.
first meet you. This is our first meeting, and spend time with you. And I look forward to continuing our relationship. But tell the audience where they can connect with you.
Yeah, well, you mentioned I'm pretty accessible through LinkedIn. I mean, I love getting back to people. So if you want to make an inquiry there, obviously Performance by Design, www.performancebydesign.co. Jump on our website, have a look, connect through us through there. But yeah, look, I love talking to people like yourself. I learn a lot as well. I've been a great environment, the sporting environment, been in the
Mm,
corporate world now for 5 years. Love talking to great people, love helping people, love getting on the journey with them. And it's not easy. Let's not
yep.
pretend leadership is easy. It's really difficult. And I say that's one of the first things I say when I speak to leaders. Don't pretend it's easy.
Mm.
It's really difficult. And we're here to help people navigate. Mate, love the conversation. Really appreciate it. And yeah, let's keep in touch.
Yeah, you're a good man, Ruzi. Thank you very much, buddy.
Thanks, mate. Good on you.